enough numbers.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the panel on Russia. They were so excited about hearing about Russia, they left me micless for a couple of minutes. So Russia is a very tricky subject to cover in the 35 minutes that we have, but we're going to try and do a good job. We have a great lineup of panelists. And I think we can talk about Russia endlessly. What I'd love to focus on is really about Russian technology, Russian entrepreneurship, innovation, and RUNET, as the Russian internet is so fondly referred to by the insiders. So before I introduce this great lineup of panelists, let me ask a question. Who has been to Russia? It's great. Who has done business in Russia, like real business? That's encouraging. 20%. Who wants to do real business in Russia? Ooh. So that's smaller. And therein lies the question we're going to explore today. So let me just introduce the panelists, and what I'm going to do is introduce only people by their first name, because people have butchered my name my whole life, and I'm just not going to do that. It's already late in the afternoon. So starting from my right, we have Kseniya, who's the head of Yandex.Factory, which is a structure responsible for market research at Yandex. I think most of you know Yandex is one of the largest internet businesses in Europe, let alone in Russia. It is the leading search service, which is also active in Turkey, Ukraine, Belarus. Next to her is Marina, a brave founder. She's the founder of Oktogo, which is one of the largest or fastest growing online hotel travel reservation businesses in Russia. Then is Edward, who is a founder of Kite Venture. It's a venture investment house, and before Kite, Edward was an exec at SUP Media, which is again one of the largest online media businesses. So he knows a thing or two about Russia. Then you have Viktoriya, who's the MD at TA Venture. It's a venture fund that's headquartered in Luxembourg. I'm sure you're never there. Investing in startups, mostly in the internet side, in Ukraine, Russia, other CIS states, and also globally. And finally, next to me, when I do sit down, is Marcin, who's an MD at Intel, been there since '99, and spent more than a decade in Russia and in general in Central and Eastern Europe. So what I thought I'd do is actually do a little bit of scene setting. I think we all know why we're here, why we're talking about Russia. It took over from Germany the beginning of this year as the largest internet market in Europe. It's the 5th largest internet grouping in the world, one of the fastest growing, second largest probably, second fastest growing after Brazil. And in many ways, that story just got started. There's a long, wide runway ahead. I was reading that the Russian internet has contributed less than 1.5% of GDP. Gazprom, which is just one company, I know it's a big company, but it's one company, contributes something like 8 to 9% of GDP. So there's a long, long way to go, which is very exciting. Not so exciting as some of the horror stories that you hear. I think you got a range of reactions on the last panel about whether they'd invest in Russian internet. I sometimes see people visibly recoil when I tell them I go to Russia often. Russia ranks 111th in the World Bank survey of doing business. To get started, you have to sign a mountain of paperwork, lots of red tape, bureaucracy, corruption. Don't want to say any more because it's going to be broadcast. So I guess the question is the glass half empty or is the glass half full? Is there really going to be a whole wave of exciting startups and next generation of entrepreneurs that are going to be founded in this cycle? Or is it going to be just a chosen few who are well-resourced, well-networked, and frankly brave enough? Marcin, what's your view?
From my perspective as investor, I would say that the glass is probably more than 90% full. From my perspective, Russia is a perfect country for investments. Two elements. Number one, there is dynamically growing local consumer market. And we just heard from Sonali, Russia is officially the biggest internet market in Europe with 60 million users and significantly higher upside than in any other country in Europe. Monetization is just really starting. So both if we look at online advertising and e-commerce, in terms of online advertising, Russia is probably as a percentage of, as online advertising per capita is at the level of 10% of leading European countries, so upside is huge. Also in terms of e-commerce, online retail is making up roughly 1.5, below 2% of total retail, as compared with double-digit numbers in the most advanced European countries. So it's already very sizable. It has tremendous growth potential. One very important thing that is making Russia different from other emerging markets is intellectual potential. Russia, in my opinion, is the only major emerging market globally that has been historically the net source of innovations. If you take a look at names of the Nobel Prize winners in science, you will find a very large percentage of Russian names there. So Russia is not only attractive as already sizable and still dynamically growing market, but Russia is also capable of creating technologies and innovations and companies that can be relevant globally. So from perspective of any investor, it is a perfect combination.
So we'll talk a bit more about that. Edward, do you agree? Is the real talent in Russia going into tech because they see the opportunity, or are people going into natural resources and commodities where, of course, there have been giant businesses having been built and continue to be built?
So I think it's you're talking about two different things. Whether there's actual talent in Russia, which there is, and it's very specific and very specific to Russia, and that also may be one of the issues why we haven't seen gigantic companies, worldwide companies coming out of Russia. But there's still a huge brain drain, and there's an issue with the legal system, with the political system, which causes that brain drain. It's much easier for scientists to get financing, for promising young Russian scientists to get financing elsewhere. Programs of any top-tier university in the US or in the UK would be higher than the whole program, program that the country has for biology or chemistry, which are two of the more prominent areas of science. So from the talent perspective, I think Russians are equipped and have been developing these special skill sets of dealing with problems in Russia. While they're dealing with these problems, they're not looking outside of the country.
Fascinating. Kseniya, you are responsible for Yandex.Factory, which is all about entrepreneurship and innovation. What have you seen? I mean, Yandex is a business that's been around very long and has been through various waves of innovation. What's your view?
So, from our perspective, we believe that as much international companies as possible should come to Russia. There is a huge opportunity, and we can say it as a company who is trying to expand globally or internationally, and at the same time as a company who is the biggest one on Russian market. We are welcoming everyone because we think that our Russian ecosystem, which used to be pretty close for years, should be added, complemented by international companies. And we are working within Yandex.Factory as well on bringing international startups, European startups, US startups to Russian market. And I think it will make the system healthy, which is always good for everyone.
So one of the things that it amazes me that people don't realize is that Russia is not about Moscow and St. Petersburg. The capitals have something like 16% of the population, but they're responsible for 60% of the revenues from the internet and market share. But of course, that's going to change. 90% of the growth is coming from the regions. It is the largest country in the world by landmass, and there are a lot of regions, which makes business very, very difficult to do. It's exceedingly complex. It's exceedingly local. We were arguing about how many time zones there are. Somebody said 11, somebody said 10, somebody said 9. I don't know the answer, but that's a lot. So, Marina, how do you operate in an environment where you have to be local at a very, very micro level. And what does
Regions-
that mean for your business? Give a little bit of perspective.
Regions is a challenge, and yet it's a major growth opportunity. What we are seeing, yes, regions took a little longer to get online, to become comfortable first using internet, then transacting online, and yes, they may be lagging behind in credit card penetration, but the regions are dramatically underserved. Now, when we talk about regions, think Russia has 12 cities that have more than 1 million people population. Those are major European cities, if you think, spread out all over Siberia and Far East and parts of European section of Russia. Major underserved, very high demand. Yes, incomes tend to be a little lower in Moscow, but disposable incomes are actually pretty high, right? Russia has 13% tax rate, living expenses substantially lower, and when it comes to commerce, when it comes to travel, regions are actually willing and able to spend. Yes, you have to deal with them differently, especially if you're delivering physical goods, you have to take care of logistics. Russian postal services, no UPS, but regions are willing to pay for it, and they're actually very patient. The satisfaction that you can achieve in regions and loyalty you can achieve there is pretty good. So in our case, we've grown from 0 regional business to more than 30% regional business right now, and that continues growing.
Viktoriya, do you agree? Do you think in the internet is going to be the great equalizer between the regions and the capitals in this big market?
Actually, I'm from Ukraine, and I can just wanted to, again, to draw your attention to the figures, which are really amazing in the region Russia, Ukraine, and CIS. Because now we are in the period when, till the 2015, the internet penetration in the Russia and Ukraine will reach 75% plus. And now we are at the ratio of 46%. And e-commerce figures are just amazing. In Russia, it's 25-35% year-to-year growth for the last 2 years, and in Ukraine, it's 80% plus for the last 2 years, and this tendency will continue for another couple of years. And the internet users, 60 million in Russia and 17.9 million in Ukraine. And out of them in Russia is 15 million shoppers, which are really very, very active in internet. And they really want to spend much more comparing to other European countries. And there are many figures which support the idea that Russia, Ukraine, and CIS market is really interesting to invest in to go now, because till the 2015, the best time to start something, everything will grow just organically. And the talent pool, which Marcin mentioned, and Marina also, that it's really something which we have, and you know that only in Ukraine, for example, there are more than 4,000 development companies with more than 200,000 people working in this branch, and like only Ukraine, 25% from the whole Central and East European offshore programming, it's there, and they're really supporting the development teams which are based in Ukraine. For example, in TIA Venture, out of our investments, and we have 20, by now we invest globally, and 25% of the companies in our portfolio have development teams in Ukraine, including the companies from US and Europe. And that means that that brings additional value to the venture-backed startups, and we believe that this is the great potential of our territory, and it's worth to invest now. In Ukraine, with the region's situation is much more easy comparing to Russia, because we are more, I mean, in terms of territory, smaller, and there are 26 regions, 26 big cities, so it's easier. But still, so the regions are more active, getting more active, they are buying more, and there are much more internet penetration from the region now. So from the capital, in Moscow, for example, there is only 6% growth for internet penetrations, Moscow and St. Petersburg, and regions is 35 plus. So they are getting much more active in this.
But do you think that because it's so difficult to execute at such a local level, that Russia is always going to be the domain of local champions as opposed to global champions? There's Yandex instead of Google, there's Contacte instead of Facebook, there's Mail.ru instead of Yahoo, there's local e-commerce companies instead of Amazon. And part of it is that many of these Western giants aren't interested or have only recently become interested, but is it that it's just very difficult to do this locally, or is it because of protectionism? And what is the panel's view on whether it's always going to be the domain of local versus global champions? Go ahead.
Example with the Groupon shows, for example, that in global big innovative companies have the chances to become the leaders also on the territory of Russia, Ukraine, etc. It's hard to compete with the players like Viktoriya, Yandex, etc. But still, so what I believe then for our territory, the really technologically driven startups with special algorithms with the hard technology, so they can become the global leaders, so because we have all the potential to bring such a companies to the global success.
Marcin, what's your view? You invest a lot in the Russian internet. Is your thesis that it's always going to be a domestic winner as you make your investment decisions?
Actually, we have a very high rate of companies that reached international success. And we've made 13 investments in Russia so far, 8 of them in the last 18 months. So actually we are accelerating. And Yandex was our first investment in Russia. It's now one of the 2 largest internet companies in Europe. The other one is Mail.ru, another Russian company. We invested in Parallels, which is one of the segment leaders in virtualization software. So I would say that weaknesses of local infrastructure are just one element that is making it easier for Russian companies to become successful in Russia. Another element is talent that we already talked about. So combination of very deep knowledge of local specifics with huge talent is creating the environment for companies that are becoming local champions with potential to become global. And if we are looking at other emerging markets globally, I would argue that difficulties of operating there are probably comparable to difficulties of operating in Russia. And still, though many other emerging markets created a smaller number of leaders, local and global leaders than Russia. So I would argue that there is a strong element, strong component of local talent that is the driving force here.
Marina, what's your view? Sorry, Edward. You compete with Bookings.com. We had Glenn Fogel on stage. It's a very impressive business. It's probably not fun to compete with them. How are you dealing with it?
So there's definitely a case to be made for local player localizing the product, localizing the service, and working more effectively with local marketing channels. And yes, Yandex having a stronger market share, Vkontakte and Kolesnik having a much bigger market share does help for a local player to compete. Yet, we have seen, and Booking.com is a very good example of international player coming in, bringing the local team on the ground and effectively executing on their international strategy, right? Not changing the strategy. We have seen other examples like TripAdvisor, for example, managing very successful business growth out of London. Yet, for most international players, the challenges that exist in Russia, the infrastructural challenges, and they are the ones that give us local players the opportunity, such as low credit card penetration, visa barriers, poor infrastructure domestically, and so forth. They big detriments, and they prevent them from entering the market fairly quickly. I think it's a matter of a couple of years, up to 5 years. Then the barriers will be reduced, the barriers to entry. By that time, the local players will establish themselves as strong brands. So it's not a black and white for sure, and we've seen both work out very well.
Edward, I think you wanted to say something. Thanks, Marina.
No, I wanted to say that...
Can everybody hear him?
I don't know. Can you hear me? Okay, so I wanted to say that Russia in general is a great market. It's phenomenal. It has phenomenal growth. It has a great talent pool. It has a history of success. I mean,
I hear a but coming. I hear a but.
Huh?
I hear a but coming.
For an investor, it's a perfect world. But then investing in Russia or working in Russia in
I'm
general.
going to say that at my next investment committee.
Huh?
I'm going to say that at my next investment committee. It's a perfect world.
Yeah. So my point was that but working in Russia is a really perverse experience. It's like going to a Russian banya. I don't know if anyone has ever been, but it's like it's great, and you feel great afterwards, and you feel great while you're there. But you need to be naked and beating yourself with birch trees, with birch branches. So it's a strange experience, and it starts by probably no one who has invested in Russia sitting here invested actually in a Russian company. You always invest in some holding company because you're afraid that you will not have a business if it's a Russian company. There are no IT protection laws. There are no just intellectual property protection laws, or very poor. There's a very poor court system that you cannot rely on in solving any disputes. Labor issues are unclear. Even tax issues are unclear. Even though there's 13% flat tax for individuals, the tax rates for corporations vary and are also unclear depending on regions and types of taxes and the types of industries that you work in. So when the question was whether there will always be local leaders. Yes, when I talk to many companies, many foreign companies trying to enter Russia, I always tell them that you're too late. It's always too late to enter Russia.
By definition.
Huh?
By definition.
By definition.
Yeah. You tell Kseniya, you tell Google that. I think you told me that Yandex is divided into 1,000 different regions, and Google has how many?
I don't know how many has Google by now.
At some point it had one.
Definitely it was only one called Russia, but for Yandex, Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, Kazakhstan are 1,400 different regions.
1,400.
1,400 different regions. And we manage in different way in each of them, and we give different search results for each of them. And one more story is about as Russia is so huge. We have numerous cities that are, so Marina mentioned 12 cities that are more than 1 million people population, but we have dozens of them with 500,000, 200,000, 100,000, and for our competitors, it's nothing. They are all concentrated in Moscow and St. Pete. And even for us, it was hard, for instance, with our maps, it was hard to cover the whole territory of Russia, so we had to create user-generated maps in order to let people draw the maps of their own cities. And 400 cities has been launched, official maps has been launched through these user-generated maps.
Fascinating. So let's talk about the subject that people whisper about, politics and political environment and the uncertainty that brings. When I closed my first investment or I negotiated my first investment in Russia, it was actually a parade day, and I was walking along with an entrepreneur who presented earlier today while there were big tanks and I think bombs on the streets. And and he said to me, you know, I actually really don't know why you decided to invest. And I said, well, we'll see. Maybe it's pure genius or pure madness. It's going to definitely be one or the other, and we'll find out. So the question is, how uncertain is the political environment in Russia? You know, it's not clear that anybody has the answer. There is a pretty disconcerting situation going on in Russia at the minute where there are proposed amendments to some laws which would propose actually including the Russian internet as it pertains to socially relevant services into an act that governs and limits sort of foreign investment and foreign investors and control. So you can sort of see this is not going exactly the way of China, but this of course is very negative for foreign investment in big categories in the Russian internet. So you know, Edward, I'd love you to speak about this subject: politics, political uncertainty, regulation, protectionism. What's your view?
So if you look at the overall political environment, Putin's promise was the promise of stability. And for the first 8 years he was in power, it was fulfilled. I mean, the country certainly grew. The economy did very well, but then it was the time of economic growth everywhere in the world. The return of Putin was also supposed to be the return to stability. But we ended up with a number of competing factions and fractions, both in the government, in the cabinet, and in the Russian Duma. And because of that, it's completely unpredictable what new laws they could come up with. I mean, there are laws that are being discussed related to investment in strategic industries and or strategic companies. And
tell the audience about what's being proposed.
So it's if there is a certain industry that is called a strategic industry, like oil and gas, you cannot have foreign shareholders having controlling interests or even minority interests with negative control. There are more absurd things related to.
No, but that's big. I mean, let's not just override what you just said. We're talking about protecting who can invest in the internet in Russia as long as it's socially relevant.
Yes, and as long as the company, I mean, it doesn't apply to smaller companies, but it would apply to larger ones.
So, what's the other panelist?
Sorry, may I just continue on two other funny aspects? One is that recently there was a law proposed that would forbid foreign social networks or foreign social media to deliver content to Russia unless it's actually hosted in Russia. Which means that YouTube or Facebook or Twitter would need to set up their own clouds in Russia and give control of the servers to the Russian authorities. I mean, if they ask for certain information, which would significantly change the dynamics. That's one aspect. Another aspect, which is the reverse, is that Russian companies are asking the government to limit sales of e-commerce from the overseas, so that overseas sites would not be able to would be limited in how they can sell to Russia. So Russia is really, and all of these initiatives, all of these stupid initiatives, are extremely protectionist. Which lowers the quality of service that would be available to Russians. And ultimately, by lowering the quality of service, you make the customers worse, and then you make the businesses that provide services to those customers worse and not globally competitive.
Marcin, what's your view? Does this make Intel fearful of investing in the region?
We've done, as mentioned, we have made 13 investments in Russia already, which makes us probably one of the most active investors in technology segment in Russia. And knock the wood, so far we haven't experienced any problems related to regulations or that are resulting from, that are of political nature. So far so good.
Viktoriya, you're Ukrainian, so you can be open.
I think in Ukraine it's a bit better because we don't have these laws which Edward described, vice versa.
You just have no laws.
Not yet. So that what we are going to do is starting from 2013, we would like to elaborate the legislation which regulates e-commerce similar to European Union. And we have the law which support the IT companies. For example, for IT companies, you have zero VAT. It's only 5% income and profit tax. And that's it. So it means that the internet companies will be on a very competitive situation, and they can continue to develop and build the products in Ukraine, and Ukraine will become the really interesting development hub worldwide. And what else? So I think that the best the government can do now on our territories as CS countries is to understand the branch more, because when they understand the industry, they can help it. I mean, not to regulate, but help to with the laws. Because now we face the situation that they don't understand the core of the investment, the startups, how it works, and why And in this situation, of course, it's getting dangerous. I mean, the adoption of any laws can be dangerous because they just have a fear that they don't understand something. And in this situation, it's better not to make some improper steps in order to regulate the business of internet. And that's what we want to somehow to protect Ukrainian internet. And I hope in Russia will happen the same.
Well, let's hope that it's only a misunderstanding and it is going to be a great investment environment. Certainly we think it is interesting at Accel. So thank you for a great panel. So let me thank my panelists, and I think our time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you.